All right, so again, welcome on behalf of Grave Creek Mound Archaeological Complex and the West Virginia Division of Culture and History and the Native American Studies program at West Virginia University. We've had a collaborative event this week funded by the West Virginia Humanities Council, and it's just been a terrific week full of learning and getting to know each other and having some fun experiences, so we're very happy about that. A reminder, just in case you didn't see the signs, we are videotaping today. We will have some DVDs made of this for the people who are involved in the program to thank them for their participation. And it will be available on the web at a later date, probably in about 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. So you can check on the WVU Native American Studies website, and there should be a link to the web. Or you can go to YouTube and Google Grave Creek Mound June 8th Symposium, and you should be able to find it that way if you're looking for it online. All right. One thing I want to stress as we get started here is that when we, Dave Rotenizer, who's the site manager here for Grave Creek Mound, and Darla Spencer, who's an archaeologist here in West Virginia who has taught for us at WVU, when we came together and we thought of having a public symposium, we wanted it to be a time for the layperson, the non-archaeologist, as well as people teaching and doing research to learn about some of the work that these fine people are doing, but to make it accessible to the general public. We don't all know the scientific jargon. We're not all steeped in archaeology, but there's so much we can learn, and I know today will be one of those times when you go home and have many thoughts and many questions that you'll want to research on your own. And it's the culmination of a week-long project involving over a dozen volunteers who were recruited through the Native American Studies program from all over the state, and one person from Pennsylvania, 2 people, I guess, from Pennsylvania, who have connections to WVU, who came and spent the whole week working almost nonstop and helping out in the curation facility and helping out with collections management and actually helping to prepare for today's symposium, getting the facility ready and helping the staff in any way possible. So we're very happy about that. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to welcome one of the great people on the staff here at Grave Creek. Amanda Brooks will come up and introduce our first speaker.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Jarrod Burks as our first speaker today. Dr. Burks received his Ph.D. in anthropology from The Ohio State University in 2004 and is currently the Director of Geophysics, Ceramic Analysis, and Electronic Mapping for Ohio Valley Archaeology Incorporated. Prior to holding this position, he served as an adjunct professor in the archaeology program at Hawkins College in Nelsonville, Ohio. He has been an archaeology technician and collections manager for the Hopewell National Historical Park and was employed as a subcontractor and principal investigator for a professional archaeological services team. As we see in many facets of our lives, technology has expanded our ability to learn about the world around us. And the same is true in the field of archaeology. As technology advances, so does our ability to research and interpret archaeological sites. Today, Dr. Burks will discuss some of the exciting new discoveries that are taking place on Ohio Valley Native American earthwork sites and through the use of remote sensing. So we're really excited to hear about some of the new things that are going on, some really amazing technology that's being used. And please help me to welcome Dr. Jarrod Burks.
Thanks, Amanda. All righty, so I guess I have to produce something amazing now for you. Should be easy. The subject matter itself is amazing. I'm from Ohio, not originally, but I'm a transplant. I've been there now for almost 20 years. And one of the things I discovered when I arrived, I didn't come to Ohio to study earthworks and Native American mounds and such, but Ohio has a lot of them. Over 600 earthwork sites are known in Ohio. So you can't go far without finding one, which is good since gas costs so much these days. I don't have to drive far to do my research. So these are all of the earthwork sites that have been recorded as of 1914 in Ohio. And you'll notice that they sort of follow a band there down the center of the state on a diagonal. And that is the edge of where the glaciers stopped moving. So in southeastern Ohio and down here in the Grave Creek area, no glacial effect on the landscape. And in central Ohio and northwestern Ohio, flat, flat, flat. So apparently the earthwork builders in Ohio really like that edge where there's a flat on one side and hills on the other. There are several really clustered areas of earthworks in Ohio, mostly in the southern part of the state. Some of these you may know about, like at Marietta there, not too far downstream from Grave Creek. But there are lots of earthworks in the Miami valleys, north of Cincinnati, though many of those have been destroyed by development. Ross County, still fairly agricultural and rural, is loaded with earthworks that are still out there, though they're difficult to see. And then some other famous places like Newark. Ohio's earthworks, and actually earthworks in most of the valley, tend to look like several different kinds of constructions. These are maps from the 1800s, and you'll notice on a lot of them that the earthworks have a black line, usually surrounded by sort of an open line. The black indicates a ditch dug into the ground, and the open line is an embankment above the ground. So circles are very, very common in the Middle Ohio Valley. And they range in size from the size of this room up to enormous proportions. We'll see in a second here how big they can get. We have really, really large earthwork complexes with geometric shapes. You don't really know how big this thing is, but this circle here is over 1,000 feet across. So quite big. And then very strange shapes. No ditches at this place, but these lines here are embankments following the top of this mesa-like landform in southern Ohio. That's 3 miles around there with embankments that are over 20 feet tall. So that's a big place. A lot of effort went into constructing that. Here's a sort of on-the-ground view with the person for scale. This is at the Newark Earthworks in central Ohio. And you can see she's standing on top of the embankment. Down here is the ditch, in this case on the inside of the embankment, and then the space inside. And you really don't get a sense for how deep that ditch is. If she were standing down there, the ditch is like 8 feet deep. She could not see out of there. So we're talking about a lot of dirt moving. And this circle, just this part of the Newark Earthworks, has a circumference of 3,700 feet, all made by hand with baskets and some kind of digging implement. And one would hope a whole lot of people to make that happen. Ohio's largest single geometric enclosure is something on the order of 1,300 feet across. So there it is. It's kind of circular. It's not a perfect circle. Our smallest enclosures, about the size of this room, only 60 feet across. Not a lot of people actually know about Ohio earthworks or Ohio Valley earthworks, especially not outside of our region. So that made me think, what other famous sites are there around the world that people maybe know more about? How about that one? You guys all probably know Stonehenge. Very impressive site. Immense stones lugged over there from miles and miles away, but it's very tiny compared to Ohio Valley earthworks. As small as our smallest earthworks. Now, of course, Stonehenge, the stones are part of a much larger site, but the famous part we know about is really quite small. Here's another famous construction, also over there in Europe, the Colosseum. Roman built actually about the same time as the earthworks in the Ohio Valley. Several stories tall, but its footprint is not nearly as big as some of our earthworks in the Ohio Valley. Finally, another type of gladiatorial arena that I'm familiar with there in Ohio, the Shoe, where football happens in the fall at Ohio State. It's a big place, but not nearly as big as some of our biggest earthworks. So these places are immense. People who built these must have had big thoughts in their minds when they were constructing them. This is the biggest earthwork complex in the Ohio Valley. This is Newark, and if you were to measure the length of all of those embankment walls here, these lines are all embankment walls, you would find that they cover about 17 miles worth of length. So why, of course, everybody asks, were these things built? And I can't give you that answer. If I had a time machine and could speak whatever language they spoke, maybe I could give you an answer. But what we do know is how old they are. and we think what sequence they go in. So we started talking about earthworks with these small, simple things, circles, and they seem to be some of the earliest constructions in the Ohio Valley. As time progressed, places with circles tended to get more circles, so these sacred spaces in the landscape maintained that status, and people kept going back to these places and adding more enclosures. And then at some point, somebody got the bright idea to make a square. Definitely a different kind of animal to construct geometrically. And so somewhere along here, we see squares that are not quite square. They kind of have rounded corners, but they definitely are different than the circles. And there's several other different shapes that appear during this middle time of earthwork construction. After squares comes size. By time 3, the size of earthworks began to ramp up. So Mound City here, with a nice square with rounded corners, is 15 acres in size. That's much bigger than these small circles. And you see it encloses a whole lot of mounds, thus the name Mound City. Then finally, by time 4, it's insanity of earthwork building. Enormous, enormous places. I don't know if you can read that, but it says 1,700 and some feet across. Very big. These embankment walls were 10 or 12 feet tall. So one wonders, how could they even see that just looking across the landscape? It's so big you can almost not see from one side to the other. And squares that are perfectly square. We do know, actually, the real time that goes with some of these constructions, and you see it there. Just about all of the earthworks in the Ohio Valley fall into this 700-year period between 300 B.C. and A.D. 400. If you know your world history, this sort of brackets the end of the Greek period, the beginning of the Roman period, almost the end of the Roman period. So there was a lot going on in the world at this time, and for some reason, this is also peak earthwork building time in the Ohio Valley. What you don't know from this slide is that in addition to these 600 earthwork sites in Ohio alone, and there are plenty of earthworks in the surrounding states too, there were also 10,000 mounds in Ohio, some of which are truly enormous. I'll show you an example of one here in a bit. So 10,000 mounds, 600 earthwork sites. You wonder, did they have any time to do anything else besides move dirt around? And we're talking about a fairly low population density too. So what are these places used for? That's another really big question that I don't know that I can give you the answer for, because there is no one answer. They were used for a lot of things. In some cases, we know that these things are astronomical observatories. For instance, at Newark, that octagon there, this is one of 2 octagons in Ohio. The octagon plus this circle here, if you draw a line through them there, that marks the maximum rise of the moon on the eastern horizon. And that's an 18.6-year cycle. So this only happens every 18 years. Apparently somebody had the knowledge and the memory to know where that was going to occur right on that spot. And they lined that earthwork up with it. There are some other earthworks that also note this alignment and lots of other astronomical alignments. So these things are apparently observatories. You'll notice that not all of the enclosures are geometric shapes. This one is a very strange shape. But if you look inside there, lots of mounds in there. So earthworks are also places where there are mounds. And you maybe have heard the term burial mound before. And this great big pile of dirt out here behind the museum, that is in fact a burial mound. There are lots of burials in it, or there were. And that's not the case with Hopewell mounds. So this mound you may know is an Adena mound here at Grave Creek, and you may also know that the Adena come before the Hopewell in most cases. So by the time we get to the Hopewell period, about 200 BC, especially around 100 AD, the mounds are more monuments to a place, and they sit on top of the remains of buildings. So the buildings are the important things. Everywhere you find a Hopewell mound at one of these earthworks, underneath it is the footprint of a building. So every mound here at Mound City has a building underneath it. This is just a plan of the little post holes that were in the ground that make this building. Inside these buildings, lots of amazing things no doubt happened. It's hard to know all what happened inside them, At Mound City, we know each building has a crematory basin in it for cremating people. So these buildings were mortuary facilities at Mound City. We also find that at many other Hopewell sites. And they also were places where the dead were buried, or at least some of the dead. And this is where we find all of the really fancy, famous Hopewell artifacts, such as things made of copper. These are flat sheets of copper. They're made from raw native copper, probably acquired from the Great Lakes area, Lake Superior. There's an island out there, Isle Royal, that is just loaded with copper. It was brought to Ohio, pounded into flat sheets with just a stone, so no heat involved, and then somehow they managed to cut them into these really fancy shapes. You notice these three are all birds. This is also supposedly part of a bird, and when you compare it to this mica object, you can see the mica thing is clearly a bird's talon, and it looks an awful lot like this, although this is a little more abstracted. There are lots of other shapes represented in copper, including bear prints, bear footprints, fish, strange geometric shapes, these kinds of things that we often associate with other cultures, though they way predate more recent events in the world history. A lot of this bird imagery also transfers into other media, like pipes. So these are made of stone, kind of like soapstone, so they were fairly easy to carve when the stone was first quarried. We see a lot of that, and you'll notice this one has a bit of copper on it. That's a repair. Apparently the pipe broke, and they used copper to fix it. In the eyes here, you see pearls, freshwater pearls. Birds aren't the only things, though, depicted on the pipes. There are amphibians, fish in the mouths of otters. There's another otter. Dogs and wolves. This mountain lion, a couple of mountain lions, actually. So, in effect, actually every kind of animal is depicted, just about every animal is depicted on these pipes. So apparently, besides building earthworks, the Hopewell also were very much into art and making these interesting objects, things we find interesting. This is probably the most interesting carved stone object that the Hopewell ever made. And I defy you to go outside and find a critter that looks like that. This is a strange composite of a snake. You see the rattle back there, some other indications of snake. The head is sort of snake-like. Horns, not too many snakes with horns these days. I'm not sure where those come from. Probably not many animals running around the Ohio Valley that had horns like that, although they are sort of reminiscent of bison. So what does this have to do with the Hopewell and earthworks? Well, those are the kinds of objects you often find at earthwork sites. Now, the people that made them lived in very small settlements. In fact, these settlements probably consisted of just a few houses, and they were clustered around the earthwork sites, which were sort of spread out along the major river valleys. And that's sort of the way it works in central Ohio. So when you go to look for the place that the earthwork builders lived, it's very hard to find them because they're so small. They're often not much bigger than this room, the entire settlement. Here's one we found in central Ohio. And I'm flying around in a helicopter right now taking pictures, but these are obviously people on the ground. They're students in an archaeology field school. And we happened upon this building here. I'm going to zoom in on it. The little white dots there are paper plates marking the locations of posts that represent this building. That's a really big building, actually. It's something like 42 feet across. And inside the building, this is a bit of an artist's reconstruction. There were 4 hearths in there. There were what looked to be benches, probably for sleeping. Under the benches were little pits in the ground that contained burned rock we think were used for heating, like radiant heaters. So a neat place, probably lived in year-round. Out back we found a burial, several cooking pits, piles of trash. So we think people were living here all year round, out on the floodplains of a big river in central Ohio. But a very small site. There are no cities that we know of for these folks who built earthworks in the Ohio Valley. One of the things they were doing around their settlements was growing plants. They're not agriculturalists like we think of agriculture, but they probably were tending good-sized stands of plants, including this one known as goosefoot. It produces a gazillion of these little seeds here on the ends of, or the top end of the plant here. Very small seed, but if you get enough of them, you can make a decent meal of it. They were also growing a plant called maygrass. While goosefoot grows in every sidewalk crack, I think, in the Ohio Valley, hard to get rid of it, maygrass probably doesn't grow around here anymore because it was an import. And it could only survive, for instance, in central Ohio if people tended it. It's more of a southern plant, but it also produces these little seeds. And then, of course, sunflower, a slightly smaller variety like this size here than what we know of today. And lots of other plants and animals that the earthwork builders were using. So my interest in all this really, my dissertation was on Hopewell settlement, but since I ended up working at Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, a place that manages some of these big earthwork sites, I got sort of hooked into finding earthworks on Ohio's landscape. I said there were 600 of them, but very few of them are actually protected in parks, and a lot of them are now invisible to your average person walking around in Ohio because they've been plowed flat. So they're very hard to see these days. Imagine an embankment wall 20 feet tall and a ditch 12 feet deep, today flat as a pancake. So it's taken 200 years, but we managed to do it. And when you read these old books, this book was published in 1848, and they lament the fact that Ohio's earthworks are disappearing from the landscape in 1848. And a lot of people, by the late 1800s, early 1900s, had said, well, they're destroyed. And of course, as an archaeologist, I can't accept that word destroyed. There's got to be something there that's still left from such a large construction. This is where the remote sensing comes in. So the remote sensing refers to aerial photography, topographic mapping, the thing that I do, geophysical survey. It's really any kind of technique you can use to look into the ground or at the ground without digging, remote sensing. So even though I'm trained in digging archaeology, I spend most of my time not digging, looking into the ground with these strange instruments I'll introduce you to here in a minute. So we have some of the earliest remote sensing we have in Ohio are these aerial photographs that this fellow Dash Reeves took in 1934. And this was before mechanical plowing with tractors like we see today really had destroyed everything. This site was probably never plowed because they built a golf course on it fairly early on. This is the Newark octagon with that astronomical alignment that comes through there. And it looks pretty much just like that today. Here's another one down in southern Ohio. You can pretty clearly see that oval there in this guy's backyard. Still there, actually. And here's one. This is one that the National Park Service owns. Great big circle. This is 1,000 feet across. And one of these squares with rounded corners. So sometimes they show up quite well in aerial photographs. Other sites, though, so maybe, I don't know, a fifth of them show up in aerial photographs, if that. Some of the smaller ones, though, like this one here in central Ohio, don't show up at all. Actually, Dash Reeves never flew this one in 1934, but we have other aerial photos to look at. For instance, just about every state in the United States had aerial photographs taken in the 1930s or early 1940s by the United States Department of Agriculture. They wanted to keep track of what farmers were doing, so they took aerial photographs. And we can see here are the two circles associated with this earthwork. Pretty clear there. What's sad is what's going on today on this landscape. So here in 1994, heck, that's 20 years ago now, just about. There's where the earthwork should be, and you can see there are now houses in here. And in Ohio, because of plowing and such, we've lost the location of a lot of these places, even though we have these maps from the 1800s. And people have forgotten where they are. And in this case, the Department of Transportation built a road across what might have been part of the intact earthwork there. There was no house there, but now there's a road there, so it's gone, at least that little sliver of it. So part of my mission has been relocating these places over the years. One of the tools I like to use to try to find them is this thing called LiDAR. It's really simple. It involves lasers like this one here. I'm pointing at the screen, shot from an airplane. And we can see the dot on the screen there from my laser pointer, but actually there's also light being reflected, and that's why you can see that dot. It's reflected at your eyeball, so you see it. This plane here has a nice eyeball there too that's detecting the reflections off the ground, and it's counting how long it takes the laser to go down and back to the plane. And with that information, it can make a three-dimensional map of the Earth's surface, which is really nice. So like the entire state of Ohio has been flown with this LiDAR technology. And that data are all out there available to the public for free on the internet. You just have to have the right software to work with it. And unfortunately, the software is kind of expensive, but you can do fabulous things with it. So the machine, as that plane flies back and forth, detects everything below the plane: trees, houses, roads, the bare ground, birds, if there are birds flying under it, you, if you happen to be walking under it when it was flying overhead. And as an archaeologist, I'm not so interested in the trees. I'm really interested in the stuff down here. Fortunately, when that laser beam was being shot down at the ground and the reflection was being detected, that one laser beam actually produces a lot of different reflections. It bounces off the top of the leaves. Some of it goes down, hits a branch, bounces back up, so a second reflection. And there might even be more reflections all the way down to the ground. So we can use software to look at only the last reflections and make an image of the bare ground. So here's that thing we've seen a couple times now, the octagon at Newark with the circle. There's that alignment with the lunar rise. And this is a bare earth model in LiDAR data. So that's just topography, nothing fancy with that image. Pretty easy to see the earthwork there. Here's another one in Ross County. This is southern Ohio. And this is just out on somebody's farm. And I've done something crazy here. I've stretched the map up and down vertically so that this earthwork here is kind of exaggerated and easy to see. This is not the Grand Canyon. There is no Grand Canyon in Ross County, but it sort of looks like it. So we can manipulate the data a little bit to make things stand out. I also added a light source, a fake light source, and put it kind of low on the horizon to cast some shadows in there. There is that earthwork just straight down from the top. We can see it's one of those squares with rounded corners. There's an entryway there. There's a ditch on the inside of this embankment. You can see pretty clearly, and a bump right in the middle, a mound. I did not have to go to this site to get this data. So it's the ultimate armchair archaeologist tool. Here's one that the National Park Service owns. This is 1,000 feet across there. This is Ohio's other octagon. It's called the High Bank Works. And you can see I've also vertically exaggerated this one so that this would show up quite well. This is a road, by the way, I think. Oh, no, this is a railroad. So the railroad isn't sitting up there 50 feet above the ground in most places. Here's one where I haven't added color. This is just a black and white image. This is out in the hills and the woods of southern Ohio near the town called Jackson. This is Jackson down here. And they have a really nicely preserved small square earthwork there. And the latest thing we've been doing with the LiDAR imagery is pretty cool. We've been taking the bare earth model, or the LiDAR data, actually, not a bare earth model, part of the LiDAR data, and combining it with an aerial photograph. Maybe. There we go. There it is. So this is not a real photograph, from an airplane. This is LiDAR data plus a flat aerial photograph. And we've used some of the LiDAR data to, we haven't stripped it all down to just the bare earth model. You can still see the trees in there, kind of. So that almost looks real, I think. And we can see the earthwork back there. And the people of Jackson, the Historical Society, just love this image. So I think I have them addicted to LiDAR data now. That's my goal in life, really. Get people addicted to this stuff. So what I bring to the table, and I just want to show you a few examples of this stuff, are geophysical survey instruments. And there are a lot of them out there that archaeologists can use. The main ones are magnetometers, electrical resistance meters, where you actually poke electrodes in the ground, and then ground penetrating radar, which I'm sure you've heard about or seen on TV. Magnetometers are not as commonly known about, and they're the main thing that I use when looking for earthworks in Ohio because they work so good. This is how they work. We're all surrounded by the Earth's magnetic field, represented by these white lines. And all of these instruments have two sensors in them. And basically what they do is the bottom sensor kind of detects the Earth's magnetic field down here. The top one detects it up here. And what we're trying to find are influences to the Earth's magnetic field down here that are caused by what's in the ground. And so then we just subtract out that reading, which is sort of the Earth's background magnetic field, and we're left with a difference. And that difference is any kind of effect caused by what's below ground. Is that a 0? Oh, fine. Okay. It's kind of dark. You need a little light. So when I get this machine all tuned up and I'm walking around out there in the landscape, it should read 0 if there's nothing down there. So that's easy to interpret. 0 means nothing. If there are iron things down there, like pieces of steel rebar, that stuff's super magnetic. And the magnetic field of a piece of rebar can affect the instrument quite easily. It can detect that. So we have no problem detecting iron objects, especially big ones like cars back there. So the readings go up, sometimes 100, sometimes 1,000 nanotesla. Things like holes dug into the ground, like some of those earthwork ditches, they're detectable too, but they're not very magnetic, maybe just 5 nanotesla. And that's because this topsoil here is more magnetic than the clay subsoil. So if you pile it up, like down in this hole here, you get a slightly stronger reading over that. If that ground is burned, that also ramps up the magnetism. It can double, triple it. So we don't have any problems detecting burned dirt. And one thing besides building earthworks that the Hopewell loved to do was burn stuff. So there are a lot of burned things out there that are related to these earthworks. This is how the instrument works. It looks very high-tech, geeky, and all that cool stuff, but it's really quite monotonous to collect the data. It's like mowing the yard. You walk back and forth all day long while the machine records a reading about every 7 inches. And you have to walk in a straight line and with this instrument at a very set pace. So it has a metronome, beep, 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 beep. It's beeping at you. I hear that beep in my sleep. And that's what it records. Numbers, lots and lots of numbers. You guys see the earthwork in there? Yeah. No? Well, to make it easy for even archaeologists to use, the software assigns colors to the numbers. So here's a really extreme close-up of some data. We can see these numbers don't vary too much back here. They're all kind of the same color. That's the background magnetism. There's something that's different. And in my maps, dark means more magnetic, light means less magnetic. So here's something that seems to have caused a more and a less magnetic spot. That's a piece of iron. So whenever you see one of these little black and white things there, you know that's a piece of iron, or sometimes rocks will do that, magnetic rocks. Well, let's look at some earthworks and see how they show up. This is Chillicothe, Ohio, kind of down in south central Ohio along the Scioto River here. This is a map made in 1848 by these fellows, Squire and Davis. And you can see there are a lot of earthworks around Chillicothe. This is Earthwork Central. That national park is headquartered right here. That's Mound City right there. There's that octagon we were looking at, High Bank, in the LiDAR data. What I want to show you is this little teeny site over here. A lot of these surveys I do on the weekend, so I don't have a lot of time, and I'm doing them on my own dime. So I'll seek out some of these smaller sites once in a while because they can be quite dramatic in the magnetic data. So we went and surveyed the steel group. There it is. This is the only map ever made of it before we went out there. You see it's 2 little circles. Looks like the gateways are pointing to the east or to the right. Here's what it looked like not too long ago on Google Earth. Exciting, huh? You can actually see one of those circles right there, barely. Now here's what the magnetometer sees. So pretty easy to see those earthworks. These are the 2 that were mapped by Squire and Davis in the 1800s. And if you remember, according to Squire and Davis, they had gateways pointing to the right or to the east. That one actually points to the southwest. So their map, totally junk. The only thing right about it was that there were 2 enclosures. And actually, they showed that this one was a little smaller than that one. They got that right. But this one is, in fact, a square with rounded corners. It's not a circle. Has a gateway that points in a different direction. You know, you start scratching your head. Gee, what else did they miss? Well, look at what else they missed. Tons of other enclosures out there that they missed. So it works good. The dark stuff here, these are the ditches, and the sort of fuzzy stuff around them, those are the footprints of the embankments that have been plowed flat. This ground out here is flat, flat, flat. You'd never know there are earthworks there. Here's a real famous site in Ohio. Maybe some of you have visited there, Serpent Mound. This is LiDAR data, so this is just topography. I've been resisting surveying Serpent Mound because if you've been there, you know it's pretty easy to see. The embankment is 4 or 5 feet tall. You know, doesn't take a rocket scientist or even an archaeologist with a magnetometer to find it. I decided to survey there because there was a larger project going on there to study the serpent. And I thought, what the heck? Who doesn't need a magnetic data set with a snake in it? I mean, it's pretty cool. So one of the things I was interested one of the challenges out there is you'll see that it's sort of up on the top of a hill and there's not much space around it to survey it. The ground drops off pretty steeply here. These lines here are the walkways out there, asphalt walkways. And then you'll see there's 2 little bumps here on either side of the serpent's head. Those show up in this map here in particular. They're those 2 little bumps. But notice that there's nothing else around it, particularly around here. I'm setting you up for something really cool that we found. Nothing on the maps. Which is my favorite thing. And the area that we found something in was right there off this strange shape in the neck. Here's me walking in that area. So this was death-defying magnetic survey. I had to not slip down the hill there. And there's the result. Hey, a serpent, duh, in magnetic data. But check that out. That did not show up on the LiDAR. That is a flat bit of ground there, and that was something we really did not expect. This is a pesky fence wire, but that, we were uncertain what that was. If you compare it to some of these other coils in the Serpent, so what I've done here is you see coil 1, 2, 3, that's 1, 2, 3. I just drew a line around these to get their shape and overall size. Then I drew a line around that, the new one, and then I overlaid them all, and they're all exactly the same. It looks like what we found was a new coil to the Serpent, actually an old coil that looks like it had been erased, probably in antiquity, and my guess is they erased that and then reconfigured the head to what we see today. Pretty cool, very unexpected. Even a very famous place like Serpent Mound can reveal some results. It took us maybe a couple of weekends worth, and most of that was driving down there. It's a 2-hour drive from my house. Last one I want to show you is Hopewell Mound Group. This is the namesake of the Hopewell culture. Very famous place, incredibly huge site. This is 3 miles around too. There's a ditch and embankment around this, nice square. This D-shaped enclosure, this is the biggest mound in the Hopewell world. It's 500 feet long and about 200 feet wide, very huge. They show it here as having 3 lobes. Almost all of the really famous Hopewell artifacts that you see in textbooks and stuff come from this mound. We see a nice medium-sized circle there that's about 300 feet across, and then a bunch of little mounds dotting the area. Here's one of the best aerial photographs. This is from the 1970s that show that earthwork, so you see the main embankment there, and you can even see a bit of the square. In 2001, the Ohio State University, where I was in grad school at the time, had an archaeological field school there, so we got a bunch of college undergraduate students who wanted to come out and learn about the Hopewell. And we divided them into groups, and they each got a couple of little spots to do surveys on. And what we were trying to figure out at Hopewell Mound Group was, what is in between the mounds? Most of the mounds have been dug there. We know what's under them. But we have no clue what's in the rest of the space, which is actually most of the site. So we just laid a grid over the area and then randomly chose these blocks to survey. And each one is about 40 meters across, 120 feet across. And the students collected all the data, which was nice for a change. I didn't have to do all that walking. This block in particular gave us quite the surprise. There's the data. The students collected it in the morning, and I was downloading it at lunch, and when that image popped up on the computer, I was like, holy moly, look at that, half a circle. That can't be an accident. That looks like an earthwork, and it looks like it's about 90 feet across. So in the afternoon, of course, we went back, collected more data, and voila, a whole new circular enclosure at like the most famous Hopewell site known to the world. It looks like it has a gateway down here. That would be pointing about east. And there was the map. We actually changed the textbooks during that field school. You have to now put a little circle in there on the maps of Hopewell Mound Group. That was pretty cool. While I was down, this was when I was working at the park, there happened to be a Cleveland Plain Dealer journalist at the park for some odd reason. And I walked into my boss's office, and the journalist said, "So, what did you feel like when you detected that new earthwork?" It's like, well, I got tingly. You know, you get goosebumps, right? It was so cool. And that's how I was quoted. National Park Service archaeologist got tingly at the new find. I was ribbed for years after that. You can probably still find that on the internet if you look that up. So, a really cool thing that's happened most recently, and we're just about at the end here, is the National Park Service. I'm now working in the private sector, and they have hired me to survey big areas of the park, including 70 acres out here at Hopewell Mound Group. So I've surveyed this yellow area here, and I added in the little circle there because I wanted to see what it looked like in a bigger context. So I was most excited about surveying that medium-sized circle because it's really never been seen. It doesn't show up in aerial photographs. So here I am. The big difference now is that the magnetometer I introduced you to before was just one magnetometer. I had to walk every single line, and it took forever. I never thought I'd be able to survey big earthworks with that one. The new machine I've got has 4 magnetometers, so it's 4 times as fast. Now we can do great big areas in a fairly small amount of time. And there's the data, about 70 acres worth. And you can see there's all kinds of weird things in there, plow scars, old stream channels. This is a lightning strike probably that magnetizes the ground. That square doesn't show up so well, but that's the main embankment. This is one of the big mounds, and there's that medium-sized circle there. And the edge of the D-shaped enclosure that's encircling that great big mound. Let's zoom in on that. This is an old fence line there, strategically placed to thwart our efforts at a nice image, of course. So there's little bits of wire still in the ground there from that fence, and they're very magnetic. But you'll notice what I wanted to show you here was there's that circle we found in 2001 that the students were pretty geeked up about. And if we zoom in on that, our survey stopped right there in 2001, and look what's just outside the gateway there. Those are about 6 feet across, and they're big pits in the ground. We have no idea what's in them, but there's obviously 4 of them there, and they're kind of symmetrically placed. Pretty darn cool. And then on the medium-sized circle, you'll notice, hey, look, right in the middle of that, 4 pits, right in the middle of the circle. And what's also, I think, even more cool about this one is these little dots along here, these are the locations of great big telephone pole-sized posts that used to be in the ground there. So at one point, this was probably a 300-foot diameter circle of really big posts sticking out of the ground. What we don't know is if those were there first and then the earthwork was built around them, or if they were there at the same time, or how that all works. But wicked cool, and we found all of that without digging a single spade of dirt. That's all I have for you. Thanks.
Jarrod, if you want to stay here for a second, keep going. We could have the lights back up, please. Is Andrew back here? Or David? They could put the lights up. We have time for just maybe 2 questions, but surely 1 question before we move on to our next speaker. What a fascinating way to kick off the morning, all of that great information, and love the imagery, the humor, and it's always great to be in the presence of a tingling archaeologist.
I'm tingling right now.
Makes the rest of us tingle. Someday there'll be an electronic device to detect our level of tingliness. Okay, anyone have a question? We'll also have time after lunch, after our keynote, we should have about a half hour for Q&A, but 1 second here. Travis, this is your mic, is it?
Check.
Okay, it's already on. Just wanted to make sure. Could I ask you to use the mic so everyone can hear you?
I came to another presentation here where they talked about the big straight road out of Chillicothe. Have you done anything with that?
The big straight road. You mean like the Hopewell Road?
Maybe.
Yeah. I'm guessing that's what you're referring to if you're talking about Hopewell roads. This is an idea that an archaeologist in Ohio, Dr. Brad Lepper, had. And it comes from a journal published in, these are field notes published, or not published, but written in the 1860s in Newark. A couple of guys, their names are Charles and, I forget his brother's name now, Salisbury. Charles, I think, is the source of the Salisbury steak later in time. But anyhow, they were really interested in mapping earthworks. And they were mapping Newark, that great big earthwork complex. And they saw, they were following out these parallel walls. And it was raining cats and dogs, and they said, the parallel walls go off toward Circleville or something like that. And they didn't follow them at the time. And of course, we're all kicking ourselves now that they didn't follow them because since the 1860s, erased. And they don't show up in aerial photographs, and they don't show up so far in geophysical data. So it's a great idea. They go for at least 6 miles to a creek, and then they seem to stop there, and there's not much evidence south of that, but they seem to point towards Chillicothe. And it may be that they go all the way, but we're having a hard time finding evidence of them. We've looked in the LiDAR data and all that. So would it be possible for them to have built that? Sure. I mean, look at all the stuff they built. Does it actually exist? We don't know yet.
Is there any evidence of flooding there or any natural occurrence that would have destroyed those?
Well, they kind
parallel-
of cross hill and dale and go all over the place, so surely they would not be flooded on top of the hills. But then that pesky thing called farming and plowing has flattened everything out there. So that might have done the trick rather than flooding. Yeah.